Welcome to Vanessa Jupiter's sitting room. This video is going to be about words. A few months ago, I released a video on this channel titled Ghosts, Grief, and Rage. In it, I assert that ghosts are real, and then I proceed to give examples that are very easy to understand, very easy to follow, and very easy to agree with. The main example that I give in that video is when dead people visit me in my dreams. I can, and to some extent, in my opinion, it's helpful to refer to those visits as being ghost visits, if that's the framework that I'm using in order to make a claim for the existence of ghosts. I don't think that a whole lot of people would try to argue against me. As I start thinking more about everything, I do think that the reality of ghosts supersedes this notion of like when they visit me in my dream. This video is not so much a retraction but more of an update. I do think that the previous video was very much where I was at the time, and I just want to say a little bit about where I am now. Let's talk about atheism. Both my parents, the people who were my caretakers as a child and as a teenager, are atheists. For them, it was never much of an identity, let's say. It was always just a thing that they didn't believe in God. They were very skeptical about most spirituality. With that, I very much was atheist for most of my life, and for pretty much my entire life. It was not a difficult thing to be. I didn't have challenges either internal or external. The idea of mortality is not one that is as difficult to engage with than it seems to be for a lot of other people. The idea of life after death has never held much appeal to me, so I never seeked to believe in something greater. I think that humans are great as they are. There was a little period over there, like when I actually first started watching more YouTube. It was very much the era of atheist YouTubers debunking Christianity and stuff like that. So for a couple of years there, atheist became more of a word that I would identify strongly with. One of the concepts that I had a definite prejudice against, and a word specifically, is belief. I think that this is very common for atheists, where we will say that we don't believe in things. I think that just phrasing things as I don't believe in anything doesn't necessarily need to come with a prejudice against the idea of believing in against the idea of belief. But I do want to say that I had this prejudice against the idea of belief. And this is very much the reason why in the previous video, the one that I just mentioned, Ghosts, Grief, and Rage, instead of saying that I believe in ghosts, I said ghosts are real. That was a very intentional phrasing on my part back then, because the reality of ghosts came to me with a clarity. It didn't feel like I had started believing in anything. It was just there now. Like, ghosts are real, and that's how things are. And now I do want to talk about skepticism. At some point, a few years ago, I started meeting people who actually practice magic and who cast spells and stuff like that. And I immediately believed that their magic worked. Like, to me, there has never been any doubt in my mind at all whatsoever that magic works, as soon as I understood a little bit better about like spell casting and stuff like that. And I don't cast spells, like, just to make this clear. I'm not talking about practices that I do myself, like, and I don't require proof of it. To me, that's just truth. it's just part of the world we live in. It's like magic works, and the fact that I don't require proof of it, and the fact that I don't know how to make arguments for it, and I'm not interested in making arguments for it, is the opposite of skepticism. So it's really funny to me that through all these years I was like, yeah, of course I'm skeptical of most things, and like, yes, I'm an atheist and everything. But the second that I heard about magic, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. So I guess I never was as skeptical as I thought that I was, which is fine. I think that being skeptical of things when they can and do create actual harm in the world is very good. Okay, so for me it has always been very easy to understand myself and understand the world through stories, through fiction, specifically stories. The reason why I decided to do Faith Crisis, the video that you're watching right now, is because I was reading this book called Affinity by Sarah Waters, and in it there is a character who's a medium and who faces a lot of skepticism from everyone around her, or from most people around her, regarding her ability to see and communicate with ghosts. And okay, one aspect of me actually feeling very connected with fiction and stories involves me losing distance. Sometimes it doesn't happen that often, but when it happens, I feel like I get sucked into a story like so much that like I don't forget that the story is a story, but I kind of put myself into the universe of it very fast and very easily at points. And that happened when I was reading Affinity. I was very much siding with the people who trusted the medium, the people who thought that the medium could actually see and talk to ghosts. And I saw myself believing her to the point where I realized, and it was obvious to a degree that it hadn't been up until that point, that my interaction with the idea of ghosts has far superseded the idea, the easy idea that I put forth in the beginning of like, yes, sometimes people die and sometimes I'll see them in my dreams and that's a ghost. That's very cute, but it's not all that I believe in. Nowadays, it's very obvious to me that the idea of people actually being able to communicate with the dead in a much more direct manner is true. I realized that I could not work around using the word belief anymore. It really was a moment of big clarity for me yet again, where like by putting myself in the universe of the story, I could see very clearly where I stood. And I stood very clearly against the skeptics. And with that, like, I'm using the word spirituality sometimes here, and it might seem, I don't know if it comes across that way, but it might seem like I'm using that word a bit too easily for someone who considered themselves an atheist for so long. It's been years that not only am I not opposed to using the phrase spiritual practices for things that I do, but I use it actively. I say that I have spiritual practices. It's been years that I do it. It started very much like as me starting to like practice yoga and starting to think like, yes, this like the way that I'm taking care of my body also involves like me taking care of my emotional needs and stuff like that, and like I understand this connection between my body and my emotions, this returning to myself. I very quickly started being like, yes, this is a form of spiritual practice, and that's fine, and I can use that word. This is kind of like how it started a little bit, But then at some point I was just straight up praying. Not praying to a god. To this day, I do not believe in a god. But I was straight up praying for things to get better. And somehow I started praying while still considering myself an atheist and not seeing any contradiction in that until 2 weeks ago when I was reading a book that made me see too much contradiction somehow. I'm not trying to make sense of myself here. I'm just trying to process together. Let's process together, shall we? Ooh. Everything that is happening is just linguistic. Like, suddenly I'm starting to use the word belief. I have decided to stop using the word atheist, which is already a word that I didn't use very often, and now I'm just not going to use it at all whenever referring to me. Moving from not using a word very often to not using the word at all doesn't sound like a big deal. And in terms of linguistic changes, I do want to bring up Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, because I do think that that was a big turning point for me in terms of using new language. Parable of the Sower starts, all that you touch, you change, all that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. Both Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, the sequel, deal with this idea of God as change. And at points, the narrator says that it's just a truth that she found out. But the thing is, the word God, right? Not an easy word for many of us. And I definitely, when I first read the book, I had a big reluctance with the fact that God as a word is such a present thing in it. But at the same time, like, engaging with the text and like, I kind of realized that like not using the word God would go against what is being proposed. And as much as I at first would very much have preferred the word God not to be there at all, at some point I kind of accepted it. I'm not confident that without that little push of me being like, oh, okay, there are words around spirituality that might make me a little bit uncomfortable at first, but let's start questioning them and let's start maybe using them. So since we're talking about words anyway, I might as well go ahead and talk about the word crisis that I decided to boldly put in the title of this video. And maybe you read that and now you're watching the video and you're thinking, this sounds a little too dramatic, doesn't it? This doesn't seem like a crisis at all. But I do want to impart that this change in terminology for me, as much as it's all happening inside my brain, or mostly happening inside my brain, and as much as there are no very practical consequences of everything that is going on, it still feels like a huge revelation. It's kind of this world-shattering moment for me. So, yeah. Faith crisis. Love, Vanessa Jupiter.